Okay, so you want to talk about what makes us, well, us, what makes human thinking different.
Yeah, dive right into the heart of human cognition.
And to guide us on this little journey, you picked a really interesting book, A Natural History of Human Thinking by Michael Tomasello.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at, where our minds came from. And, it really challenges some of our basic assumptions about what makes humans special.
Right, because we always hear about like tool use or, understanding what other people are thinking, but Tomasello, he takes a bit of a different approach, doesn't he?
Yeah, he kind of flips the script. He says the secret sauce, the thing that really sets us apart, is something he calls shared intentionality.
Shared intentionality. Okay.
Mm.
I gotta admit, that sounds a little intimidating. Like, are we about to dissect a brain here?
No scalpels required, I promise. It's really not as complicated as it sounds. Just think of it this way. It's like this built-in drive we have to collaborate, to get on the same wavelengths with another person. Like, it's not just about what do I want? It's about figuring out what do we want to achieve together.
Oh, okay. So it's less about me, myself, and I, and more about we.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Tomasello points out that even chimpanzees, our closest primate relatives, they haven't quite cracked this code.
You're saying we're smarter than chimps when it comes to working together?
Well, it's not about being smarter, exactly. Chimps, they're brilliant, don't get me wrong. They can even outsmart us in certain tasks.
Really? Okay, now that is kind of humbling.
Right. It really challenges our assumptions about intelligence. But when it comes to true cooperation, like working together toward a shared goal with a shared understanding, that's where humans really excel. Chimps, they struggle with that.
So it's like that old saying, teamwork makes the dream work. Chimps haven't quite gotten the memo.
Pretty much. And Tomasello argues that this whole shared intentionality thing, this ability to team up and be on the same page mentally, that's the foundation for human thinking as we know it.
So how did our ancestors even stumble upon this whole shared intentionality thing?
Well, Tomasello, he paints this picture of our early ancestors facing some pretty serious challenges, harsh environments, limited resources. They had to cooperate to survive.
It's like cooperate or starve.
Exactly. And that pressure, that need to collaborate, it led to the first big leap in human thinking, joint intentionality.
Okay, so shared intentionality 1.0.
Exactly. It's where you have two individuals working together with a shared goal. And this is crucial, a shared understanding of that goal.
So it's not just about lending a hand, it's about understanding why you're both working towards the same thing.
You got it. And one of the key ingredients of joint intentionality is something called joint attention. And that's the ability to not just look at the same thing, but to understand that you're both looking at it, and importantly, grasp why it's significant to both of you.
So like what would be a real world example of this joint attention in action?
Imagine you're trying to, I don't know, get a friend to notice a beautiful bird in a tree. You don't just stare at the bird, right? You point to it, make eye contact, maybe even make a gesture like, wow, look at that. You're trying to create that shared experience that we're in this together moment.
You're trying to get your friend on the same like wavelength, the same page with you mentally.
And that's joint attention in action. And according to Tomasello, it's a game changer for human evolution.
So we've got our early humans, they're pointing at birds, sharing honey, realizing that teamwork, it really does make the dream work.
And that's a great example because, the next step in Tomasello's theory, it gets even more fascinating. So as these early human groups, as they grew larger, more complex, well, their thinking had to evolve to keep up, right?
Makes sense. The bigger the team, the more complicated the game plan needs to be. So what'd they come up with?
Well, Tomasello, he calls it collective intentionality. And it's like joint intentionality, but, on a much grander scale.
Okay, collective intentionality, another one for the vocabulary list. But seriously, what does that even mean?
Think of it this way. Imagine the difference between, like, coordinating a dance with one other person versus, say, an entire flash mob.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. With the flash mob, everyone needs to be on the same page.
Exactly. With a larger group, you need a much deeper level of shared understanding, right? It's not just you and I know this step. It's we all know these steps. We all agree on the rhythm. We're all on the same page. That's collective intentionality in a nutshell.
So it's like moving from a simple partnership to like a whole society with shared rules, expectations, the whole shebang. And that requires everyone to be on board, mentally speaking.
Exactly. It's about developing what Tomasello calls a cultural common ground, this shared understanding of how things work in the group.
So like the group's rule book, their shared cheat sheet for navigating the world.
Yeah, exactly. And that includes everything. I mean, from social norms, rituals, to shared knowledge about the environment, even, eventually language.
Okay, so as humans, as we shifted from small bands to these larger, more complex societies, our thinking had to level up to keep up with this whole new level of like shared understanding.
Precisely. And here's where things get really interesting. How did our ancestors, how did they even begin to communicate these complex shared ideas? Like, how do you go from pointing at a beehive to explaining the rules of a hunt or, passing down the history of your tribe?
Right, those honey gathering signals, they weren't going to cut it anymore. They needed something more, something that could convey not just look at that, but like, this is what it means and this is how it relates to us.
Exactly. And Tomasello, he argues that even before language emerged, the need to coordinate in these larger, more complex groups, it pushed humans to develop these more sophisticated ways of communicating. And it all started with something surprisingly simple.
Don't tell me interpretive dance.
Even simpler, pointing.
Pointing, seriously. That's it. Seems a little underwhelming, doesn't it?
I know it sounds basic, but think about it. Pointing, it's not just about directing someone's gaze at an object, right? It's about connecting with their mind,
Yeah.
trying to get them to share your focus and, crucially, understand why you're directing their attention to that specific thing.
So it's like a very early form of mind reading, right? You're
Mm.
trying to build a bridge between your thoughts and someone else's.
You got it. And it requires, this understanding that other individuals, they have minds of their own, minds that can be, like, influenced. And this is something that, and this is fascinating, apes really struggle with.
They can't point.
They can point, they can follow your gaze when you point, but they don't seem to fully grasp that pointing is about sharing a thought and intention.
So if I point to a banana, a chimp might think, oh, she wants the banana. But they wouldn't get that I'm trying to share, like the experience of, hey, we found bananas.
Exactly. They seem to miss that layer of shared understanding, that
Right.
we're in this together aspect that's so central to how humans communicate.
So pointing it might seem small, but it represents a huge leap in like cognitive complexity.
Absolutely. It's like our ancestors were dipping their toes into the water of symbolic thought, letting one thing stand in for another.
Which, when you think about it, is a pretty crucial precursor to language, right?
100%. The ability to say, this gesture, this sound, this symbol, it represents something else.
It's like our brains were doing these cognitive stretches, getting ready to go from pointing to Shakespeare.
Exactly. Our brains were learning to think about thinking, to understand that communication. It's not just about reacting to the world around us. It's about actively sharing our inner world with others.
So we've gone from like grunts and gestures to pointing. It's kind of amazing how much is packed into this simple act, right?
It really is. Pointing, it was like laying the groundwork for something much bigger, something that would revolutionize human thought.
You mean language?
Exactly. Language takes this whole idea of shared intentionality to a whole new level. It's like with language, we can build this complex shared understanding, not just with one other person, but across like entire communities, across generations even.
Okay, so language, it's like this massive upgrade to our collective intelligence.
I like that, yeah,
Yeah.
because it allows us to share ideas on a scale that would be impossible with just gestures and pointing. But it's not just about the scale of communication. Language actually changes the way we think.
Really? I always thought language was just a tool for, expressing the thoughts we already had.
That's a common misconception. But Tomasello, he argues that language isn't just a tool for expressing thought. It actually shapes the very structure of our thinking.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about this mind-bending theory. How does language actually change the way our brains work?
Well, think about it. Those arbitrary linguistic conventions we use, words, grammar, syntax, those things, they give us this incredible power. They allow us to form abstract concepts, to construct these elaborate arguments, to engage in a level of reasoning that would be honestly impossible with gestures alone.
Okay, yeah, good point. I'd struggle to order a pizza using only mime, let alone explain, quantum physics.
Exactly. Language, it frees us from the constraints of the here and now. It allows us to think about the past, to imagine the future, to ponder abstract concepts, things like justice or infinity, things that have no physical representation in the world.
So it's like language, it's not just a communication upgrade, it's a cognitive revolution.
Precisely. And with that increased cognitive power, something really remarkable happens. We develop this ability to reflect on our own thoughts.
Wait, hold on. Thinking about our own thinking, is that even possible?
It is, and we do it all the time. Like when you catch yourself daydreaming and you think, wait, where did my mind just go? Or when you reread something you wrote and realize it doesn't quite make sense, that's reflective thinking. And language makes it possible.
Wow, that's wild when you think about it. It's like language lets us step outside our own heads for a second. Like we can observe our thoughts as if they belong to someone else.
Exactly. And that ability to analyze our own thinking, to get some distance from it, it's key to what we call objectivity.
So you're saying that language, it's not just about expressing our own like subjective opinions. It actually helps us move towards a more like objective understanding of the world.
Exactly. Tomasello, he argues that language, particularly the kind of reasoned discourse that happens when we're making decisions together, it forces us to consider multiple viewpoints, to weigh the evidence, to justify our beliefs.
So it's like when we engage in like a debate or even just a thoughtful conversation, we're not just trying to win or score points,
Right.
right? We're actually, in a way, trying to reach a better, more accurate understanding of the world together.
That's a great way to put it. It's like this collective pursuit of truth, this ability to see past our own limited perspectives. That's a hallmark of human thinking, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It really is amazing to think that something as, seemingly simple as language could have such a profound impact on who we are and how we understand the world around us. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Michael Tomasello's A Natural History of Human Thinking. It's been quite a journey from those early collaborative apes to the incredible power of language and the very nature of human thought. Big thanks to our expert for guiding us on this fascinating exploration.
It's been my pleasure. Always happy to talk about the mysteries of the human mind.